Uncertainty is not weakness. It is the highest form of intellectual honesty. What if everything you were ever taught to call faith was actually just a very sophisticated, socially accepted form of fear? Fear of not knowing, fear of the unknown, fear of sitting in the uncomfortable silence of I don't know. Here is something that will rearrange the furniture inside your mind. The most dangerous sentence in human history is not I hate you, it is I already know. Because the moment a human being believes they have the final answer about existence, about death, about the nature of reality, they stop looking. And the moment you stop looking, you stop living in the truest intellectual sense. Science built every hospital, every antibiotic, every bridge you've ever crossed on a single radical act, the act of doubting. Not cynicism, not nihilism. Honest, rigorous, disciplined doubt. The universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old. It stretches across 93 billion light years of observable space. And somewhere in that incomprehensible vastness, human beings decided, with total confidence, that they had a book explaining all of it completely. That is not faith. That is the intellectual equivalent of reading one page of an encyclopedia and declaring you've read everything ever written. Uncertainty is not the enemy of meaning. It is the birthplace of genuine discovery. The people who changed the world were not certain. They were curious. The universe doesn't owe you comfort, but it offers you something far greater. What if the reason religion feels so irresistibly comforting is precisely because it was designed that way, engineered across millennia to soothe the one anxiety every human being shares, the terror of meaninglessness? Let's be brutally honest. The human brain is a pattern recognition machine that evolved in a world full of predators. It is wired, physically, neurologically wired, to see intention behind everything. Rustling in the bushes must be something alive. Unexplained death must have a reason. Tragedy must serve a purpose. This is called agent detection bias, and it kept our ancestors alive on the African savanna. But it also means the human brain will manufacture a story, a divine story, a cosmic story, before it will tolerate the silence of randomness. Religion did not arise because someone discovered God. Religion arose because the human mind cannot tolerate an unstoried universe. And here's the shocking part, that's not an insult. That is a profound, humbling window into the architecture of consciousness itself. But when you realize the comfort was constructed, when you see the mechanism, you are faced with a choice that very few people have the courage to make. Do you want the comfortable story, or do you want the actual universe? Because both cannot fully coexist. Religious institutions and the concept of God are not the same thing, and confusing them has cost humanity dearly. What if the single greatest intellectual error in the history of civilization has been allowing organizations built by humans to speak on behalf of something allegedly beyond all human comprehension? Think about what that actually means. You have finite, politically motivated, economically incentivized, historically documented human institutions claiming exclusive ownership of infinite truth. Not partial truth, not probable truth, absolute, unquestionable, heresy punishable by death truth. The Inquisition was not a spiritual movement. It was a power structure using the language of God to maintain control over populations. The burning of the Library of Alexandria, the suppression of Galileo, the obstruction of germ theory, the resistance to evolution. These were not moments where religion defended the sacred. These were moments where institutions defended their authority. And those are two completely catastrophically different things. A genuine encounter with the mystery of existence, the kind that makes your chest tighten when you look at the Milky Way, that is real, that is valid, that deserves exploration. But the moment a human being in robes tells you that their interpretation of that mystery is the only permissible one, and that questioning it makes you immoral, you are no longer in the presence of spirituality, you are in the presence of control. And the difference matters more than almost anything else in human civilization. Science is not the opposite of wonder, it is wonder with its eyes open. What if the most breathtakingly spiritual experience available to any human being is not found in a building with stained glass, but in understanding how a single cell divides, how a star is born from collapsing hydrogen, how the same atoms in your body were forged inside an exploding sun billions of years before Earth existed? People have been sold a false war. Science versus religion, reason versus faith, cold logic versus warm meaning. This is one of the most destructive intellectual frauds ever perpetrated on the human race, because real science, not the textbook version, not the politically argued version, but the lived experience of genuine scientific discovery, is among the most emotionally overwhelming, consciousness-expanding experiences a human being can have. When you truly understand that every element heavier than hydrogen was manufactured inside a dying star, that you are, literally and chemically, made of stardust, that is not a cold fact. That is poetry written in physics. When you comprehend that light, leaving a distant galaxy, started its journey before multicellular life existed on Earth, that you are looking back in time every time you look at the night sky, that doesn't diminish awe, it multiplies it by a factor that no scripture has ever matched. Science doesn't kill wonder. Ignorance kills wonder. And science is the most powerful weapon against ignorance ever devised. The morality argument, can humans be good without God? What if the question, can you be moral without religion, is not just philosophically answerable, but the evidence answering it is already all around you, and has been for centuries. And the only reason it feels controversial is because powerful institutions decided long ago that morality was their product to sell. This argument, that without divine command human beings descend into chaos, is perhaps the most emotionally manipulative and historically unsupported claim ever made about human nature. Let's examine the evidence with unflinching honesty. The most secular nations on Earth, Scandinavia, Netherlands, New Zealand, consistently rank highest in happiness indexes, lowest in violent crime, highest in charitable giving, and highest in social trust. Meanwhile, some of the most religiously saturated societies in history have produced slavery, genocide, crusades, and systemic abuse, all explicitly endorsed in the name of divine authority. Morality did not come from above, it evolved. Empathy, cooperation, fairness, these are documented behaviors in chimpanzees, elephants, wolves. Because societies that cooperate survive and societies that betray implode. Evolution built your conscience long before any religion claimed ownership of it. You don't need to be threatened with eternal punishment to care about another human being. You need to be reminded that their suffering is as real as yours. That reminder is called empathy, and it predates every scripture ever written. The most honest thing a mind can do is remain open forever. What if the greatest intellectual act you could perform right now, greater than memorizing any scripture, greater than defending any doctrine, greater than winning any debate, is to sit quietly, look at what you actually know versus what you've been told to believe, and have the raw, rare, breathtaking courage to say, I don't know, and I find that magnificent. We live in an age where people are celebrated for the certainty of their opinions. Social media rewards confidence over accuracy. Institutions reward conformity over curiosity. Communities reward belonging over truth-seeking. And slowly, generation by generation, the most precious cognitive tool a human possesses, genuine, humble, open-minded uncertainty, gets trained out of us like a bad habit. But here is what every great thinker across every discipline and every era has discovered. The more you truly learn, the more you realize how little you know. Not as a discouraging conclusion, as a liberating one. Because it means the universe is inexhaustibly interesting. It means there is always more to discover. It means your understanding is never final, never capped, never imprisoned inside a single book or a single tradition or a single lifetime. An open mind is not a weak mind. It is the strongest, most dangerous, most revolutionary thing a human being can carry into any room. What if I told you that the most radical, the most subversive, the most genuinely dangerous thing I can say in any room, in any century, is not a political statement, not a scientific claim, not a philosophical argument, but these three simple words, I don't know. Let me explain why that matters more than almost anything else I could possibly say to you today. I have spent a considerable portion of my life looking at the universe, really looking at it through mathematics, through experiment, through the kind of obsessive curiosity that keeps you up at 4 a.m, not because you're anxious, but because the problem is so beautiful you can't bear to stop thinking about it. And what that process taught me, what it burns into you irrevocably, is that reality is under absolutely no obligation to be simple, comfortable, or arranged for human emotional convenience. And yet, everywhere I look, I find human beings, brilliant, warm, deeply feeling human beings, organizing their understanding of existence around frameworks designed primarily to make them feel comfortable. And I want to be careful here, because what I'm about to say is often misunderstood. I am not interested in mockery. I am not interested in the cheap intellectual sport of dismissing what billions of people hold sacred. That requires no courage and produces no light. What I am interested in is something far more radical, the truth. Let's start with uncertainty, because this is where almost every important conversation goes wrong before it even begins. We have built an entire civilization that treats "I don't know" as a confession of failure, as weakness, as something to be quickly covered with authority, tradition, or confident-sounding language. And religion, organized institutional religion, has historically been one of the most sophisticated systems ever constructed for converting human uncertainty into human certainty at the price of genuine inquiry. Think about what that actually costs. When you tell a child who looks at the stars and feels that overwhelming, wordless electricity of wonder, when you tell that child, "We have the answer, here it is, memorize it, do not question it," you have not educated that child. You have inoculated them against curiosity, and curiosity is the only tool we have ever had for understanding anything. Now, and this is where it becomes genuinely uncomfortable, I want you to understand something about your own brain, because the religious impulse is not a spiritual malfunction. It is a cognitive inevitability. Your brain evolved to detect patterns, to assign intention, to storify random events into coherent narratives. When early humans heard thunder, their survival depended on rapid interpretation. Is this a threat? Does it have agency? The brain that assumed agency and was wrong lost nothing. The brain that assumed nothing and was wrong got eaten. So your brain is a relentless, automatic, unconscious, meaning-making machine. And when you apply that machine to the terrifying silence of an indifferent universe, the machine does what it was built to do. It manufactures a story with a protagonist, a moral framework, a reason for suffering, and crucially, a reason why your particular tribe has special status in the cosmic order. This is not a criticism of human beings, it is a profound observation about the architecture of consciousness, and understanding it changes everything. Because once you see the mechanism, you have a choice. Now let me address the claim that disturbs me most, not intellectually but morally. The claim that human organizations, with their politics, their hierarchies, their economic interests, their documented histories of abuse and power consolidation, have been granted exclusive interpretive authority over the nature of infinite reality. Let that sit for a moment. We are talking about institutions that suppressed heliocentrism, institutions that owned slaves with scriptural citations ready, institutions that told dying patients their illness was divine punishment, institutions that made Galileo recant what he could prove because it disturbed their cosmology. These are not ancient, irrelevant footnotes. These are the consequences of what happens when you grant any human organization immunity from question. And here is the thing, the genuinely important thing that gets lost in these debates. None of this has anything to do with whether the universe has depth or beauty, or whether human beings can have experiences so overwhelming they collapse the vocabulary of ordinary language. Of course they can. I've had them. Standing at a blackboard at 2 in the morning when an equation resolves into unexpected, impossible elegance, when the math reveals a symmetry so perfect it could not have been designed because no human mind would have been bold enough to design it. That experience is as profound as any described in any religious text. More perhaps because I know I didn't construct it, I discovered it. Do you understand the difference? Religion, at its institutional core, presents a finished universe, explained, ordered, catalogued. Science presents an unfinished universe, wild, inexhaustible, perpetually more surprising than your best current model of it. One of these is a closed door with a painted sunset on it. The other is an actual window. Now, the morality question, because someone always raises it, and it deserves a genuine answer, rather than a dismissive one. Can human beings behave with decency, compassion, and genuine moral courage without being threatened with eternal consequences? Look at the evidence. Actually look at it. The most secular societies in the modern world are measurably, not anecdotally, not philosophically, but statistically, the most peaceful, the most equitable, the most charitable. And some of the most explicitly religious societies in history have produced atrocities with remarkable efficiency, each one scripturally endorsed. Morality is not a divine download, it is an evolutionary achievement. Empathy, the ability to register that another creature's pain is real and matters, exists in species that have never heard a sermon. It evolved because cooperation is survival and exploitation is extinction, and biology figured this out long before philosophy did. You don't need a cosmic reward system to care about other people. You need to be present enough to recognize that their experience is as vivid and as real as yours. That recognition is available to any conscious being willing to pay attention. Which brings me to the most important thing I know, and it is not a fact, it is not a formula. It is a posture, a way of standing in relation to reality that I believe is the closest thing to genuine wisdom I have ever encountered. Stay open, not passively open, not the kind of open that accepts everything uncritically because it fears conflict. I mean the active, disciplined, sometimes painful openness of a mind that is genuinely willing to be wrong, that holds its current best understanding with confidence but without rigidity, that understands the difference between believing something deeply and knowing it certainly. The universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old. We have been doing modern science for roughly 400 years. We have mapped perhaps 5% of the observable matter in existence. The rest, dark matter, dark energy, the mechanisms of consciousness, the question of why there is something rather than nothing, remains open. And that open space, that gap between what we know and what is, that is not where God lives, that is where curiosity lives. And curiosity, relentless, humble, electrified, joyful curiosity, is the most honest, the most human, and the most magnificent response to existence that I have ever found. The universe is not asking you to worship it, it is asking you to understand it, and the difference between those two requests, that difference is everything. Every word of this speech has been aimed at a single target, not religion, not science, not any institution or doctrine or tradition. The target has been you, your mind, the extraordinary, irreplaceable, never to be repeated instrument through which reality flows and gets interpreted and responded to. You were not born with certainty, you were sold it. And the most liberating act available to any thinking person, in any era, in any culture, in any circumstance, is to hand that certainty back and pick up a question instead. Not because questions are more comfortable, they are not, but because they are more honest. And in the end, honesty about what we know, what we don't know, and what we are still discovering is the only foundation worth building a life on. The universe is real. Your curiosity is real. Your capacity for wonder is real. Everything else, every framework, every doctrine, every explanation is provisional. And provisional is beautiful because it means we're still going. What if the single most important thing you were ever taught, the framework through which you understand death, meaning, suffering, purpose, and your own existence was handed to you before you were old enough to question it in a language you were too young to challenge, by people who themselves had never examined whether it was actually true? What if the reason it feels so certain, so solid, so obviously correct to you right now is not because you examined it and found it true, but because it was installed so early and so completely that questioning it feels less like intellectual inquiry and more like betrayal? Here's what I've found after spending a lifetime looking at how the universe actually works, not how we wish it worked, not how we were told it worked, but how it measurably, demonstrably, shockingly actually works. The truth is stranger, more beautiful, more overwhelming, and more free than any story designed to comfort you could ever be. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. I'm going to take apart the arguments you've heard your entire life and show you something on the other side that is not emptiness, it is wonder.